Hello everyone, my name's Emma Henningsen and I'm a board member at Swesif. I'll be moderating this meeting today, this seminar today. Warm welcome. Swesif is Sweden's Forum for Sustainable Investment. We have more than 110 members now and have been running for over 17 years. And holding seminars and webinars is one of our primary activities that we offer to our members. I'm really pleased to have this webinar today on nutritional challenges. The nutritional value of food products can have important consequences on societal health. We see it in our world around us every day, I think. And unfortunately, we still hear about the major challenges in emerging market countries, in developing countries relating to poor nutrition. So these questions are always there and becoming more and more important, I think. And we're seeing increased burden on healthcare systems and therefore also starting to see some regulatory actions in this area from governments around the world. I'm really happy to have here Rachel Crossley, who is Senior Advisor for the Access to Nutrition Foundation, and Helena Björk, who is a dietitian at Axfood, who know much more about this subject than me, and I very much look forward to learning with them. Rachel's going to give us an overview of the diverse challenges that there are around nutrition, and then talk more about how her organisation is helping investors and encouraging companies to through providing tools for greater insights. Helena will provide more of a Swedish perspective, working at Axfood. She can talk a little bit about how she sees the issues in Sweden and in the Nordics, and also about how Axfood is working to approach those issues. In addition, could we just go to the agenda slide, please? In addition, at the end of this main section around nutritional challenges, we have a session starting at 11 o'clock, which will focus on the very important topic of breast milk substitutes, where Rachel will be talking about Access to Nutrition's work there. So please stay for that if you can. It would be very interesting, I think. And that is what I wanted to say to kick us off. So I'd like to welcome Rachel Crossley then from Access to Nutrition Foundation. Rachel and I have known each other for a few years in various different guises, and Rachel has been a senior advisor to the organisation for over 10 years. I'll pass on to you, Rachel.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the introduction. Very good to be here and present our work to Swedish or other Scandinavian investors. So, of course, first I would like to present the overarching international architecture, as it were, for nutrition, and to give you a very brief overview of the seriousness of this challenge. We now understand that nutrition is central to delivering the SDGs, not just the two SDGs, number 2 and number 3, that have targets related to nutrition and health, but as this great graphic on the left shows from WHO, how central it is to many other topics. We know that we need a huge amount of investment to achieve the nutrition targets. That's because we have around 820 million people in the world who are undernourished, as in stunted or wasted. Then we have another 2 billion people, although there's a bit of an overlap between those two populations, who have micronutrient deficiencies. So that might be iron that causes anemia, or iodine, and several other micronutrients that, if they're lacking in the diet, cause a range of illnesses and can be fatal. And then we have another 2 billion people in the world who are either overweight or obese and suffer from all the related diet-related diseases, such as diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. And as this graphic from the Global Nutrition Report shows, many countries have more than one burden. 88% of countries, in fact, are trying to tackle 2 of these burdens at once. And that's only actually counting out of a subset of the countries in the world. That's not even a graphic that covers all countries in the world. So we have some very, very serious challenges, as Emma said, affecting, we can see it every day all around us. And we have to understand as well that undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies are not the only challenge that the developing world faces, but there are growing overweight and obese populations and growing levels of those associated diseases in those countries too. So in response, the World Health Organization has set 2 sets of targets, one relating to maternal, infant and young child nutrition. For 2025, there's 6 of those, and then there's 3 nutrition-related NCD targets, non-communicable disease targets, 3 related there to salt intake, trying to reduce high blood pressure and halt the rise of obesity and diabetes, which in turn should stem the development of other non-communicable diseases. So we have a good structure, a good set of targets around which to orientate any response. This graphic from the Food and Agriculture Organization shows that we are not at all on track to achieve 7 out of those 9. We're also not on track to achieve the other 2. They just didn't include those in this graphic, but we're way off track, in fact. So all stakeholders, all actors need to redouble their efforts to tackle global nutrition challenges. We know we've got great data now from around the world as to how poor diets contribute to the disease burden. There's actually data now where you can see how the lack of individual dietary elements in turn causes certain illnesses, and the contribution of those illnesses to disability adjusted life years, which is a very technical way of measuring these things. So we've just got poor diets practically everywhere in the world. We're now seeing, very unfortunately, that diet-related disease appear to be contributing to cases and deaths related to COVID-19. So these are just 2 sets of data, one from the UK and one from the US, but the data in other countries is similar, showing that those with diet-related diseases, the hypertension, diabetes, chronic heart disease, etc., are seen to be contributing significantly and disproportionately to deaths and cases of COVID. So yet again, another indication that we really need to tackle this root cause of so much illness in our societies. This graphic focuses in on children. Mostly this is from the developing world, but some really frightening statistics here showing that 30% of children more or less don't eat any fruit daily. Between about 20 to 30% don't eat vegetables daily. Around half of children have soda daily. So, you know, huge rebalancing needed in many children's diets around the world too. We know that there are huge social and economic impacts. There's direct and indirect impacts. There's the direct cost of treating these illnesses, which is assessed to be around $3.5 trillion globally a year, which is just a staggering figure. And then there's a huge indirect burden through productivity impacts across the whole society, which are estimated at around, or in 2010, globally, the estimate was 1.4 trillion. So of course it'll be much higher now. And there was a Morgan Stanley report in 2015 that looked at obesity and diabetes rates combined and estimated that the impact on GDP of the OECD nations was likely to be around 18% over 20 years. So a huge drag on our economies, not to mention the huge personal impact, the impact on families, etc. So, of course, we know that the food sector is enormous and has to be part of the solution. That's the stance that AT&I takes. It's where we come to this whole debate. With revenues of 2.7 trillion in 2016 and a growth rate higher than the world's population, that indicates obviously that there's increasing, everyone around the world is increasingly buying processed foods. So given its huge scale and reach, we really need to encourage, incentivize, press the private sector to be part of the solution. This graphic helps to illustrate the increasing proportion of diets across a range of countries made up of processed foods, from 60%, more than 60% in France, through to 40-odd% in Russia, nearly 40% in Brazil, and rates creeping up in India and China and other similar countries. And one of the key pieces of research that we do is we look at the actual nutritional quality of packaged foods. And the 2018 analysis we did of 23,000 products around the world found that only 32% of those across 9 markets could be considered healthy, and only 14% could be considered to be suitable to market to children. So currently we have, unfortunately, a pretty unhealthy processed food supply in the world. So in terms of the investment response and the business response, this is a graphic that you'll see later when I talk about the investor expectations that we're developing and launching next week. But we believe that the investment case is really building for investors, no matter what strategy you're pursuing to address nutrition in the food and beverage sector. We've got accelerating consumer trends for healthier products and shrinking demand for less healthy products. We've got increasing regulation, be it on the food composition itself, be it on food labeling, claims, marketing, etc. We have increasing sugar taxes around the world, or sugar content taxes, and there's the potential that many states might start to claw back healthcare costs associated with treating obesity and diet-related diseases. And then, of course, you've got a lot of innovation with a lot of technical solutions driving new product development and making it possible to tailor products to consumers' nutritional needs. And then that feeds through in terms of how well or poorly companies manage those the risks and opportunities relating to these drivers into better or worse investment outcomes. So this illustrates, for example, the accelerating regulatory response with more than 44, I believe it is, sugar-based taxes in either countries or states or cities around the world of various levels, and the number increases every year. And then there's a fair few statistics out there demonstrating that sort of the legacy or traditional food and beverage manufacturers are losing ground and really struggling to keep up their growth and their returns, whereas it's the smaller health-focused companies that seem to be doing better. And that apparently hasn't even changed in the COVID epidemic, that there's still good demand for healthy foods, which is very good to hear. Of course, we've seen a big increase in the demand for a wide variety of diets in the recent years: vegan, vegetarian, plant-based, gluten-free, and then of course there's the need for low sugar products or low salt products to help manage different diseases. And of course there's increasing demand for personalized health and wellness solutions now around the world. But that's all coupled with the need still, the demand of consumers, that healthy products be affordable and convenient and attractive, of course. So a big challenge. So moving on to introducing AT&I, that's the backdrop against which we do our work. We are not-for-profit, established in 2013, based in the Netherlands. We aim to be fully independent. We are fully independent of industry. We're funded by foundations like the Gates Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and government agencies like the UK Department for International Development and the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, among others. So we aim to be fully independent and objective and do rigorous analysis of major food and beverage companies' responses to the Global Nutrition Challenge. We are multi-stakeholder based. We do a lot of consultation and aim to fully align our methodologies and everything we do to that international policy architecture and all the standards and guidance that I was outlining earlier. This is a bit of a complicated diagram that shows our theory of change, but essentially We publish indexes that I'll describe in a minute that provide a basis for direct engagement with companies that are rated to try to drive better performance on nutrition. That's shown on the left-hand side there. And then we also make all of our materials fully available to all stakeholders to use in their work to also indirectly influence companies, including investors, to drive towards healthy and sustainable diets for all. We've been growing, well, not rapidly, but we're in our fourth phase of development now, of having sort of developed and demonstrated our indexes and our benchmarking. And then we're in a phase now of developing additional tools, expanding to different countries, looking to partner with different organizations, and disseminating our work even more widely. So the core focus of our organization, as I've said, is trying to drive private sector action on nutrition, and essentially we develop private sector accountability tools for use by investors, by other stakeholders, by the companies themselves. So there's three types of output. We have global food and beverage sector indexes. We have what we call spotlight indexes that rate companies in particular countries. So far we've done those in the US, India and UK. And then we're developing a suite of other tools and partnerships and research projects. The global indexes look at what companies are doing across 8 different areas, from governance and management to product reformulation, to affordability and accessibility of healthy products, marketing of healthy products, what companies do to support their employees and consumers to live healthy and active lives, whether the companies are pursuing good labeling and claim use, and then engagement with stakeholders, and that includes responsible lobbying. And then we have a big focus on responsible marketing of breast milk substitutes, given how key infant and young child nutrition is. So far, we've published 3 global indexes in 2013, 2016, and 2018. And the next one, which was supposed to be 2020, is postponed to 2021 due to the coronavirus crisis. So the indexes look like this. I'm not going to go through the results. There's the overall ranking, and then the scoring. And on the right-hand side there, you see the product profile, where I mentioned before that we analyze the nutritional quality of products. That's where the stats came from. So you can actually get a ranking separately as to which companies' portfolios are healthiest and least healthy. That's broken down also to category level. You can see who are leaders in which particular category. And as far as we know, that's the only analysis freely and publicly available of this kind. We're now recognized by most of the index companies that we rate, who engage with us very actively. We rate around 25 of the largest companies globally for each index, and around 10 to 15 in individual markets. This is the plan for the next global index, but I won't dwell on that due to limited time. We launched our second India Spotlight Index in February this year, which covered 16 the largest food and beverage companies operating in India. That's available on our website. And then in the UK earlier this year, we also launched for the first time an analysis of the 10 largest supermarkets in the UK in partnership with Share Action, which you probably have heard of, which is a UK charity that works with investors on a range of ESG issues and campaigns. And they have a new Healthy Markets campaign that's focused on reducing childhood obesity in the UK. So we're partnering with them. We put out this first piece that looked only at companies' publicly available information, but this is going to be followed in 2022 by a full index. I should say that our indexes aren't just based on publicly available information, but also on information that companies themselves upload to our platform and the engagement that we have with them. So we're capturing confidential information that isn't available to other stakeholders in the public domain. And unfortunately, you can see that the UK supermarkets here were found to be reporting very poorly on this topic, and we're hoping to really drive that forwards and improve that over time. So the really important thing for investors is that there's a scorecard for every company related to each index, and also on the BMS sub-ranking. So on our website, you can get very long, detailed scorecards to use in your research and engagement. And I want to now turn to outlining a new initiative that launches next week. So we have put together some investor expectations on nutrition, diets and health. We currently have 70 investor signatories who, many of whom have been with us since 2013, that manage around 7.5 trillion in assets under management. And when we launched, sorry, I'm going to skip this slide. When we launched, we had an investor statement. But we feel that since 2013, time has moved on and there's a real need for investor expectations now. So there's 3 key drivers for those expectations. We now have the SDGs, of course, and all stakeholders, or most are aligning around the SDGs, including many responsible investors. And so it's time to really orientate expectations of companies around SDGs and the other WHO targets, etc. We feel there's a real need to increase investor engagement on nutrition to accelerate progress on this agenda, because as you've seen, we are nowhere near tackling it. And what we see when we go to a lot of nutrition events and conferences and dialogues and policy making events is that there is no institutional investor perspective there or voice at all. So we feel it's time to bring an institutional investor voice to those debates. I think I can skip over this. Essentially, as I said, we think now is the time to move from a simple statement of sort of risks and opportunities related to nutrition towards expectations, given all the experience we have. So next week, we are going to be circulating to all of our signatories in the first instance the investor expectations. And inviting all our current signatories to continue to support ATNI and the investor expectations. And then we're going to be reaching out much more broadly to investors that we haven't engaged with before to invite them also to support the investor expectations. They are structured very much like others. There's 4 key expectations, 1 around governance, 1 around strategy, 1 around responsible lobbying, and 1 around transparency. With specific there's a hierarchy, as you can see, of asks here, some high level asks under each heading, and then particularly for the strategy expectation, there's an annex that outlines much more specific, 13 specific, excuse me, asks of companies around product reformulation, marketing, labeling and claims, and so on. So we will make sure that those of you on the webinar get those as well, and we'd love to welcome you also as signatories behind those. There's a lot more detail within them. We have for each of those 13 example asks, the specific asks, we're showing exactly how those link to different WHO targets. If you're set up to try to sort of track impact and track contribution of companies towards different SDGs, we hope this will help you, and it also helps you navigate and see which of the AT&I category topics each expectation links to. So as I said, we're now at this point of rolling out to our current signatories, and then we're going to spend the next 6 months rolling them out to a much wider audience around the world, and then hopefully launching them more formally and officially towards the end of the year. So there would be absolutely no cost to becoming a signatory. We are boosting the support that we give to signatories, having got a new grant for that. So we're going to set up an investor portal on our website with a lot of investor relevant materials on nutrition, and then we will support collaborative engagement after the next global index, and can offer investors much greater support than we have been able to date. So that's the email address, investor.support@access2nutrition.org, to get in touch with us. And we would love to welcome you as signatories. And of course, if you'd like a one-on-one call with to provide much more detail and walk through the investor expectations in much more detail, we'd be absolutely happy to do that too. So I think I will wrap up there.
Rich, I was wondering, how much, can you say anything about awareness within the companies that you're analysing? I mean, you mentioned that some of them are very happy to upload data and share information with you. Is that typical? What proportion, you know, how are companies, and are there companies that appear to be completely unaware of the topic? I mean, how does it look?
Yes, well, I suppose it's the same pattern that we see on other benchmarks and other ESG topics. We have the best engagement, I would say, is always from the European headquartered companies who've really embraced a sort of a long-term sustainability outlook, and that you'll see that the top score in our indexes is usually 6.87-ish out of 10. And so it's the Nestle's, the Danones of the world, the Unilevers who are always in those top spots, at least overall. And then we get variable engagement from the US headquartered companies. The Japanese companies to date, the couple that we rate had, well, up until the last index we'd struggled to engage them, but that's really turned around. Particularly Ajinomoto is really engaging, Meiji increasingly. And then you'll see in our indexes there are little indications as to the companies that don't engage with us, and they're, as you might expect, the Southeast Asian, there's Chinese listed companies, Hong Kong, Taiwanese based, and a Brazilian company who are least interested in the topic, it appears. So as you would expect, what's very interesting is the difference between the overall ranking that up to now has separated out what we call the corporate profile, which is the analysis of the company's policies and management systems and disclosure, as these benchmarks always do. But if you set that against the product profile, which actually tells you how healthy or otherwise the company's products are, you get in some cases, quite different rankings. So Nestle particularly stands out because it has its own data. It publishes its own data about the percentage of products that it considers healthy using its own definition. And when we apply an independent nutrient profiling model, the proportion is very much lower. So I think that's where the real guts of the issue lie, is sorting out between what's actually going on with the company's portfolios, how quickly they're improving them, but then of course that links across to how responsibly they're marketed and the affordability and accessibility of healthy products. It's no point companies having a huge portfolio of healthy products if they're not affordable and not accessible to low-income consumers and not accessible in many low-income countries. So that everything has to go together. But very different levels of engagement and apparent knowledge and interest in different geographies, I would say.
Thank you. And does it always cost does it always cost more to create a healthier product? Is that one of the underlying reasons? Or?
Not always, no. I mean, there's again, there's a lot of analysis out there. On the sell side is, the place to look for that. There are some cases where healthier products are more expensive, and then there's other cases where not. So it depends quite a lot on the category, but you can find a big range again between healthy, like lower cost and higher cost products. So it's again quite complicated in terms of the branding and the positioning that a company is going for of products in the market, which isn't necessarily directly and only linked to the cost of producing it.
And if you were just very briefly before we move on, if you were to describe the main reasons why we have the picture that we have in terms of what was it, 14% of products that are suitable for children to eat for nutritionally. Why, if you can very quickly describe the reasons that you see that companies that this is the case, that would be helpful. Well,
it's a classic answer of, if you you need to look at the systemic analysis. There's a term that is used a lot by academics of an obesogenic environment. So there's just so many factors that contribute to our overall environment that we live in. So increasing urbanization, increasing sedentary lifestyle, increasing availability of unhealthy, low-priced foods, a demand when you have a faster lifestyle, increasing working hours, then you're looking for convenience. There's so many factors that contribute to it. Much more marketing is put behind less healthy products than healthy products. Again, there's an interaction with the manufacturers and how they relate to retailers and how products are positioned in retail stores, which I'm sure we'll hear about soon. So it's really not, it's nothing to do with people becoming less disciplined about their diet, as some people say, or lazier or anything like that. It's not a personal choice. It's very much to do with how modern life is structured, not just in the developed but the developing world. And we have to tackle all of those different drivers, many of which actually many solutions overlap with climate change solutions. So active transport and the way cities are designed and food is produced and all of those kinds of things. So that the food and climate agenda overlap is very interesting.
Thanks very much, Rachel. So we're going to move on now to hear from Helena Björk, who's a dietitian at Axfood, and who will give us a bit of a more Nordic and Swedish perspective on the challenges, and also a corporate perspective. How is Axfood dealing or addressing these issues? What's possible, what's not, as a single company? So over to you, Helena.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I'm just going to give you some quick facts about the company I work for, Dagab Purchasing and Logistics. We have 2,300 employees, and we are located at 9 places in Sweden. We have actually an office in Shanghai, China. It's basically for our private label products that is produced in China, mostly non-food products. Dagab is a part of Axfood and Axel Johnson Group. Our partners are Urban Deli and also Halmiba, Mat.se, Middagsfrid, Apohem. And Halmiba is a retailer for building materials. Mat.se is online sales. Middagsfrid offers ready-made grocery bags. And Apohem is our pharmacy online. This is our stores and our concepts. And let's see. I'm sorry. Yes, our sustainability work is very important for us. Our main goals with this is reduce climate impact, like food waste, transport, food production, and material recycling. And also efficient use of energy and control of our supply chain, like working conditions for our workers at our suppliers. Animal welfare, pesticides and chemical use, and also ecological and healthy food. And this is some of our brands for our non-food products and non-food products. Yes, as a dietitian, I'm responsible for our work internally and externally regarding allergies, sugar, salt, health claims, free from labeling. And I'm support the buyers and the quality assurance for our private label products. I'm responsible for some of our internal routines and policies regarding allergies and traces of and free from labeling, of course. And I am also participating in external networks in these areas. And I also educate and participate at seminars, both internally and externally. I'm also responsible for our work with palm oil and soy, that for our label brand products, and we are members of the RSPO and RTRS. It's the globally work for responsible palm oil and responsible soy. And we're also members of the Swedish Soy Dialogue, and it's the retailers and food industry and supplier for feed that are members in the Swedish Soy Dialogue, and we are working also for responsible and responsible production for soy in our products. Yes, overweight and obesity continues to increase. And the presence of overweight and obesity increases in all ages, actually. And among grown-ups, the proportion of being overweight has doubled since the 1980s. And half of all grown-ups in Sweden is living with overweight or obesity. And even among younger children is an increase. Every fifth 6 to 9-year-old has overweight or obesity. And overweight, this is one of the main causes of illness in Sweden. And the risk of type 2 diabetes, cancer, and heart disease is high. And the health is also affected by social stigma. So this can affect persons with overweight and obesity. And the causes, one of the causes is in our environment and our society we live in. Also, an increased availability of foods and drinks, bigger portions of foods, and a big range of unhealthy foods is some of the causes. And this together with less physical activity and fewer transports by foot and bike leads to this. And the solution, you have to slow down this. To slow down this, you need to have long-term prevention in these areas, I think. Preschool and school, healthcare, transport, and food industry and retailers, and also the civil society. And our work with health is that we have a sugar policy in our for our private label brands. We also have health goals in our sustainability program. It's new, so it's going to be from next year. And salt and sugar is like we call it a technical parameter when we develop our private label brands. And we use the keyhole. It's a symbol we can use on products, and it's different criteria for different foods. But it is to help the customer to choose more whole meal products, less sugar and salt, and better fat composition, more unsaturated fats in the products. So it's easier to find them in the source. We're also a member of the Swedish Food Retailers Federation, and we have a 5-point program for health. We have health focus regarding assortment of foods and product development, labeling and information to make customers more aware, inspiration to healthy choices, marketing and information. And we have co-workers that has education within nutrition and health. And research is also important when it comes to the food's effect on your health. And we also look a lot at the Eat Lancet report that was launched a few years ago. And we really looked at this when we were planning our health goals in our sustainability program. And this is basically that we really need to have a change of diet by 2050. And we need to eat more fruit, vegetables, and nuts, and we have to eat less sugar and salt. And this has to be reduced by 50% until 2050. And this is actually also very good for your health, because if you do that, you eat less red meat and sugar and salt. So sustainability and health is really, really connected. And also nudging is a good and effective way. And nudging is like a small push in the right direction. And it's an effective way to affect people that's in the marginal, like the ones that really agrees, but they need to be reminded every day that you need to do this change. So you really have to know your target group when you work with nudging. Like, for example, if you want to affect people to eat more plant-based food at home, you need to know why they buy meat today. Is it an old habit for them, or do they forget when they are in the store or online? Do they have a strong opinion that a meal is not complete without meat, for example? So you have to make it simple, and you have to highlight important information in a simple way, and you have to avoid unnecessary information. And our online mat.se that I mentioned before, they have used this to give climate smart choices for our customers when they are online. So hopefully we can give them even healthy choices in the future. That was all. So, questions?
Thanks very much, Helena. I had a quick question to start off. You mentioned a sugar policy coming. Is that now in effect, or and can you say a little bit more about what that means?
We had that actually for a while, and it's when we develop our private label brands or our private label products, you have to check the sugar amount in the products. So we check it, and if we are matching it with another product that we look at, we don't want more sugar in our product than the product that we are matching, for example, and also products that the customer doesn't really know that there's sugar in it, that there's a lot of sugar in it. So then we have to lower the amount of sugar. But it's also, of course, you need to have sugar in some products. So that we have to check it every time we launch a product. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And we had a question in the chat here. In what way do you influence suppliers to implement practices that support sustainable and animal-friendly practices?
Oh, we have a really huge sustainability program, and we also always check with our suppliers when for our private label brands mostly, and we check everything in their supply chain. So they have to tell us exactly what suppliers they use for producing the product to us. And then we have these surveys that our suppliers have to answer if they're going to have our brand on it. So we check everything with how they treat the animals and how they treat the workers at their production. And so it's a big work for our CSR team. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
There was somebody who'd opened their mic just before. Was there somebody wanting to ask a question? I think we need to turn that on. There we go. Apologies for that. Can you say anything about, I mean, you started off by talking about the Swedish perspective on overweight and obesity. Do you have, how has that changed over, can you say anything about how that has changed over time? Is it, and how it compares to perhaps other countries in the Nordics or in Europe? Do you have any?
Yes, I think it has increased totally, actually, around the world, and also in the Nordics, I think. But I know that Finland, they work very hard with salt. They have a salt policy, so they have really reduced their amount of salt in the products, and it's legislation about it. So they have really done. They have done a good progress with that. So they actually lowered their the heart diseases in Finland. But in Sweden, we didn't really come to the legislation about salt and sugar yet, but it is on discussion. But I think it's in Sweden, actually, it's increased a lot with overweight and obesity. So yes.
And how do you see the likelihood of there being legislation in the near future in Sweden?
If we want to have it, or if
I mean, well, perhaps both questions. How does Axfood see that? But also, how likely do you believe it would be that something we could see some kind of regulation in, say, the next 5 years?
Maybe. I mean, it is on discussion in the EU, and it's in this discussion in our for us too. But maybe it will be, because it depends on how it goes with the health for the. Yes, so we'll see. But I don't know if that's the way to go. But maybe it's a good help, actually, to try to reduce the people with overweight and obesity. But we will see. Maybe it will be in the future. Yes.
And when you're looking at your when Axfood stores, do the Axfood stores in any way take into consideration assessments such as the access to nutrition indexes? Is that something that could be used by your organisation in its dialogue with suppliers, or in choice of suppliers and choice of products in any way?
Yes, of course we can have a choice, but it's hard, because since we are a marketplace for all kinds of foods, so we have to have all these kinds of foods in our stores. So maybe our way to do this is more information, and maybe better choices, or better price for the healthier foods than the unhealthy foods. But that's needs to, well, all the stores have to do the same work, I think, and maybe together with our partners, the Swedish Federation. So, but you can always do something. You can always try to. But I think information and nudging is a good way, I think, for us as a retailer to work with, to try to give them the better choice. Yes.
If there's anyone else who wants to hop in a question, please feel free. Otherwise, perhaps I'll ask, what do you perceive as the main challenges for companies in terms of, for your suppliers in terms of changing their product offering?
I think that the challenge is not our suppliers, really. It's probably our own work and our own price negotiations and everything that's part of this, of course. So I think that's the main challenge, of course. That's the thing. But I think because if we tell our suppliers that we want this product, they can give it to us. I mean, you can produce healthy foods, so that's not the problem. But it's a challenge when it comes to price, of course. And yeah, so that's needs to be more work with that, I think. Yes.
We have a question from Aline. Would you like to ask your question, Aline?
Sure. I'd be very interested in knowing a little bit more about the trends and the switches from consumer habits to plant-based food. And I'd be interesting to know about the trends that you have been observing, and you probably have done some A/B testing on your different websites, or what you were talking about nudging earlier. What are the strategies that work best to nudge people into having more plant-based food, and how quickly has the adoption been, and also to what kind of products? Is it more towards manufactured plant-based alternatives, or is it more towards just generally more vegetables?
Yes, I mean the plant-based foods actually is kind of already here, I think. I mean, the trend is like already here, and it's maybe even not can call it a trend anymore, but it's you really need to try to have good choices. I mean, you need to have a good assortment of these products in the stores, because if it doesn't taste good, you're not going to sell it, and the people are not going to stop to choose the plant-based instead of the meat. So it's very important. Like, taste is really king with this plant-based food, but it's really has been exploding actually in the shelves in Sweden, I think, with all kinds of plant-based food. But you really, it's a challenge actually to really have the taste. So the ones that really can do that, they are going to succeed, I think, with the plant-based food. So you really need to try to inform and try to push them to choose this instead of the meat, you know. So, but it's a lot of work too.
And are you seeing that as it becomes a challenge to people who are producing meat? On the other hand, does that put pressure on them already, or is it something that you expect to happen later?
It has. I think it has affected the suppliers for meat and ready meal, I think, because they are starting to produce plant-based also in the ready meal section actually. So it's really happening. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena. Excellent to hear what Axfood's doing. It's been very helpful. If we don't have any more questions, I think we can move on to start to talk about the breast milk substitutes as a specific topic. And then I would welcome Rachel Crossley back to take up the discussion on this important topic, which is unfortunately still a topic we need to be discussing, despite discussion over many years. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks very much, Emma. Yes, that is the key point, in fact, that it is 40 years nearly since the WHO adopted the WHA, actually, the World Health Assembly, adopted the International Code on Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, and 40 years of opportunity for companies to adopt the recommendations within it. And unfortunately, we are still in a situation where there is extensive marketing of breast milk substitutes around the world, which is undermining breastfeeding. So that's why we focus very heavily on this topic. We have a whole sub-ranking within each of our global indexes that looks at the world's largest baby food companies and the alignment of their own policies on marketing of these products to the code. And then we do studies in countries to look at whether the actual marketing practices live up to the policies. So just to back up a bit and reiterate how breast milk substitute marketing fits in with the nutrition agenda. It is very well established through many academic and other studies that the first hour of an infant's life is very important, that breastfeeding needs to be initiated within that time, and that exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months and then continued breastfeeding for up to 2 years has enormous impact on the baby's health and then health in later life. So there's a term around now, the first 1,000 days, which is conception to being 2 years old, which is the window of opportunity to really introduce the optimal diet for infants and young children, and in optimal breastfeeding, which is the exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months and continued breastfeeding, has the biggest impact on child mortality of any preventative intervention. The Lancet published a series, I think it was in 2016, which has all of the argumentation, all of the data, and reiterates their research that shows that 823,000 child deaths could be prevented per year if that level of breastfeeding was achieved around the world. There's evidence also that breastfeeding reduces the risks of being overweight and obese in later life, which again, we're now seeing has knock-on effects in terms of things like COVID, and protects the mother from a series of diseases. So it's free, obviously, and it's absolutely the best nutrition and the best protection, immunity protection that a child can have. So at the moment we have, you can't really read the graphic unfortunately, but you can see broadly the yellow line is there the goal of 50% of exclusive breastfeeding on average around the world for the first 6 months, and each of those sets of bars represents a different region, and breastfeeding is well below that, on average 42%, but that disguises some very low rates in certain regions. So again, a lot of catching up to do, a lot of work to do to increase breastfeeding rates. But again, it's not so simple as breastfeeding being an individual mother's choice. What we see is that there are enormous structural barriers to breastfeeding, which means, for example, a lack of access for new mothers or pregnant women and new mothers to support around actually breastfeeding in that first hour and thereafter. There can be a lot of issues, a lack of training of many healthcare professionals as to its importance. Then, of course, if there is a lack of maternity leave offered by employers, a lack of legislation or regulation within countries to require it, that diminishes mothers' ability to stay at home and breastfeed. And also, if they go back into the workplace, there's often a lack of clean private spaces to express and store breast milk, which is what they need to do if they're going back to work. And then there are many, many cultural barriers and societal influences, all the way from embarrassment of breastfeeding in public, some misunderstanding as to the impacts or what you can and can't do when you're breastfeeding, certainly a lack of awareness of the health benefits in many places, some cultural norms and expectations and influence from family members. So there's a lot of different influences, but among them, and very importantly, is quite a lot of misinformation out there, which is due to the widespread marketing of breast milk substitutes. So the sort of the messages that breast milk substitutes companies have tried to get across, and relatively successfully for years now, is that formula milk is essentially more or less the same as breast milk, which is not the case in terms of it cannot provide the same immune benefits, and it's not formulated the same, and it's not tailored to the individual baby, of course, which breast milk is. And then also the marketing has led many women to question the value of breastfeeding, to doubt their ability, to think that they're not producing enough milk, that it's not rich enough, all kinds of things like that. And then there can be a lot of confusion also about which formula to buy, and sometimes a belief that the more expensive one has to be the best, which is absolutely not the case. So there are many, many reasons why we have suboptimal breastfeeding and infant nutrition. But what AT&I focuses on, of course, is the private sector performance in this area, what the different baby food companies' policies and practices are. Organisations like UNICEF, for example, focus very heavily on the structural barriers. So does WHO, Save the Children, others, trying to address all of those. So our focus is very much on companies, whether their policies and practices align to the International Code of Marketing that, as I mentioned, was introduced in 1981. And all the resolutions that have been passed since that amplify or augment and re-emphasize elements of the code. there's no other standard. It's not as if there are many competing codes or standards or sets of recommendations around breast milk substitute marketing. So there can be no argument that there's confusion as to what the gold standard is. Also, I think of interest, particularly to Nordic investors, is the international human rights framework that completely reinforces this approach, which is the Convention on the Rights of the Child, particularly, as well as other instruments where the children's own rights are articulated, the right to life, survival, development, the highest attainable standard of health. And so breastfeeding is considered an integral component of that, as well as the right to safe and nutritious foods. And then women also having the right to accurate, unbiased information, good quality health services, maternity protection, etc. So again, we have a very clear and strong international policy architecture and framework there within which to do our work and to encourage companies. We know exactly what companies should be doing. So the baby food industry is one of those among the food sector, although not all actually manufacturers sit in the food sector, that is growing quickly. It's now worth 71 billion, or it was in 2018, and it's expected to reach $100 billion by 2025. And its annual growth rate tends to be around 5.5% compared to 2% for packaged food. So it's a very attractive segment for food and beverage companies, particularly, or other companies to be in. And the margins are around 25%, which makes it equally a very attractive segment. So, of course, there's strong competition here for companies to drive those revenues, to grab market share, to get entry to new markets. As countries' incomes increase, then there's a direct correlation usually with demand for these products. And it's essential, therefore, that any company operating within this segment adheres to the code to protect breastfeeding and not undermine it. So we have focused to date on the 6 largest companies in the sector, but as of this next index, which is now the 2021 Global Index, we're going to assess the 10 largest companies that you see there. So when I was saying that not all of the biggest breast milk substitutes manufacturers sit within the food and beverage sector, that's because RB, obviously known much more as a health and personal care company, bought Mead Johnson a few years ago, which is a big breast milk substitute maker. And Abbott is essentially a pharmaceutical company with a big nutrition division, and that is the division that makes the breast milk substitutes. And as you can see, there's now 3 also Chinese companies, the bottom 3 there, the 8th, 9th, 10 players that are growing rapidly, all through sales within China. But they have intentions to grow internationally, we understand. So again, we take the approach of both assessing, and what we call the shorthand is BMS1. The methodology that we use is BMS1 is looking at the company's policies, management systems and disclosure, and the alignment of all of those with the code's recommendations. And then the second element of our analysis is 2 in-country studies for each global index, where we look at whether the company's marketing actually aligns to the code. Each of those elements weights 50-50 towards the overall score on marketing of breast milk substitutes and complementary foods. You'll see the CF there, that's complementary foods, which we also look at. And then while there's a sub-ranking for these companies, in and of itself, the scores that any company that's included in our overall index, the scores that they get on this element then affects their score in the global index. So up to the 1.5 out of 10 points of their score on the global index is related to their score on this index, on this sub-ranking. So again, our analysis is the most comprehensive, most detailed available on these companies. We developed our methodologies, as all of them, with extensive stakeholder consultation, and we revise them each cycle, index cycle, to make sure that we're taking into account any developments in terms of new WHA resolutions, etc. We do those 2 in-country studies each time. We work with a big health research company to do those that has no conflicts of interest and doesn't have any commercial relationship with the companies that we're assessing. We have a specialist expert group that advises this work, and then we publish it all in great detail, and it's picked up by investors in their engagement, by the likes of Save the Children, UNICEF, FTSE for Good, FTSE Russell's FTSE for Good indexes increasingly draw on our work rather than doing the analysis themselves. And in fact, B Lab, that runs the B Corp system, is introducing new criteria on BMS marketing probably by the end of this year. So there's increasing traction with this issue, and our work is used very, very widely. What we publish are, as I said, so within the global index reports, there's a whole chapter dedicated to the results of this analysis. Then for each country that we do the study in, looking at marketing practices, so in 2018 we were looking at Nigeria and Thailand, there's a separate detailed study. Each company then has a detailed scorecard available where we outline all of the scores against every provision of the code and in relation to different types of products. And then the very long technical studies by our partner Westat of those in-country studies are also published. So there's a wealth of information for any stakeholder, including investors who wishes to do research and engagement in this area. This is what the 2018 results look like. As I said, we assessed the 6 companies then. You see the lighter grey bar is the 2016 score, the darker grey bar is the 2018 score. So we had Danone and Nestle more or less neck and neck at 46–45% overall, both having made quite big strides since the previous index. Emma, your question before about the extent to which companies engaged, the reason that Abbott's score there was 7% in 2016 and then jumped up to 34% was because for the first index they didn't engage with us at all, and then for the second index they did, and that substantially improved their rating, as you can see. We have the Dutch co-op Friesland Campina is a major maker, and their score didn't change very much. So you can see very specifically there the analysis on breast milk substitutes, and then there's the impact on the overall global index score that the score on BMS has. As you can see, there was a minus 0.8 impact for Danone, for example, and Nestle on the overall global index score. So that gives them a strong incentive to try to do better in this area so as not to damage their overall global index score. The in-country studies are very, very detailed, following what's called the netcode protocol developed by WHO and a series of experts on how to conduct such studies. It's primary research. It's survey-based. It means going into healthcare facilities in each country, interviewing women there with their infants, healthcare workers. It involves going to physical retail stores, monitoring online retailers, promotions and advertising, and also we monitor traditional media and online media companies' own social media as well as third-party media. So it's very, very comprehensive, as you can see. And then for the 5 countries that we have assessed, 5 to date, varying scores and instances of non-compliance, which usually are strongly related to how strict the regulation is in each country. But also you can see quite significant variation among the companies themselves. So this is a level of detail that isn't available from anywhere else. So that's all I was going to say for now on our analysis. If you'd like to have any more background, of course, look at our website, or I'd be more than happy to do a call with you. We know that Norges Bank does quite a lot of engagement on this area, KLP in Norway. So it seems like it's a topic of interest to several Scandinavian investors, and we urge more of you to take it up. And what I wanted to close with is outlining a forthcoming initiative from the major UN agencies and NGOs, essentially a call to action to the industry, which will be published in a couple of weeks' time. And
if we have any questions, pop them in the chat. Otherwise, I just maybe ask how much of ATNI's work is around breast milk substitute specifically. Is it 20-30%, or is it?
It's a bit hard to put a number on it, but it's a very strong focus. It's, I'd say, probably 15-20%, and I think it's going to increase because these other organisations are going to increasingly draw on our scores and ratings for their certification, like B Corps or for FTSE, in terms of determining which companies qualify to be on FTSE for Good. And because there is no other organisation that does this kind of analysis, there's increasing demand for this and increasing understanding of the importance of this agenda. So I think that there will be an increasing focus over time, hopefully also as a result of the call to action. We of course would like to expand our BMS sub-ranking to encompass more and more companies. There is the opportunity within each of our spotlight indexes to have a focus on the breastfeeding and infant and young child nutrition in individual countries. And in fact, there's a whole other agenda as well, which is linked, which is complementary foods or weaning foods. So as soon as children are 6 months old, and they can be transitioned onto solid foods. Of course, there's a growing number, and again, the segment that is growing very fast is commercially produced complementary foods. And there's a great deal of concern about the nutritional content of those products. And so WHO Europe, for example, in July last year, published a nutrient profiling model that it's being made publicly available so that any entity can assess the nutritional quality of such foods. So we're doing pilot research this year, because we'd actually like to also publish product profiles of the nutritional quality of the complementary food portfolios of the major manufacturers, and use that as a way of driving improvement in the quality of those products, and decreasing marketing, obviously, of the less healthy products, increasing the marketing of the healthier products, etc. So that's a whole nother area of our work that's growing as well.
And do you have interactions directly with policymakers as well, with governments, or is that sitting with other organisations? And how can you say anything about how awareness or the topic is being seen?
Yes,
in governments?
Sure. I mean, we don't have direct interaction with governments in terms of trying to say, because we don't do advocacy. We're not an advocacy organisation. We're providing independent, objective, quantitative, qualitative analysis and research that others can then use. So WHO is the definitive organisation. Each year it puts out a report that just came out in May, which assesses the number of countries around the world that have code-aligned regulation, or they basically assess each country and whether it has no regulation or weak regulation or strong regulation, etc. So that's a very useful resource. So WHO is the body with other NGOs that advocates and supports their member states, the governments around the world, to adopt that kind of regulation. But also within the Meridian Dialogue, it's been a key strand of discussion as well, where many of the companies are saying, well, we don't object to countries, of course, adopting very strong regulation that is code-aligned. We'd support that. We'd prefer that in a way, because it gives a level playing field, and it doesn't then fall on the companies to set their own policies. And sometimes if they set a stricter policy to market less, they lose revenues and market share. So they would rather, they say, have a level playing field. But at the same time, then the NGOs and UN agencies in that dialogue come back and say, but we have got manifest huge evidence of companies lobbying against the adoption of such regulation. And so now there's quite a strong focus on, well, what will it take? What we need to see from these companies is responsible lobbying. So lobbying in support of such measures and not against them. And in fact, another piece of work that's coming out of the Meridian process that will be published soon, actually a week or two's time, hopefully, is something called a responsible lobbying framework. So actually this has been produced by drawing together other materials out there from Transparency and Harvard and OECD on responsible lobbying, and sets out, well, what does a responsible lobbying policy look like? What are the management systems you need? What level of transparency? It's actually sector agnostic. Any investor, any company could pick it up and apply it to any sector. But it just so happens that it came out of this dialogue. And so, in fact, we are going to fold it into our methodology. So in future, you will see an analysis of baby food companies' alignment to the responsible lobbying framework, but also within the global index for all the 25 food companies, they'll be assessed against it. And then we hope that it'll make its way into research providers' methodologies and other investors' ways of assessing companies. We've seen obviously action on lobbying on climate change. There's investor expectations around that, and there's investors working on that. So we would like to see equivalent action in the food and beverage sector and then across lots of sectors to really push for, to diminish all of the lobbying that goes on to undermine regulation and legislation in the public interest, in the public good, and get companies to flip that and support the right kind of targets and regulation. And so coming right back around to BMS, we see that as a really key solution as well, is it would, I think many national governments would practically fall off their chairs if BMS companies came along and advocated for the same thing as, say, UNICEF and WHO, as in good code-aligned regulation. But the few companies involved in the dialogue say they're willing to do that. So the test will be, will they adopt the responsible lobbying framework, and then how will they stack up against it in our assessment. So we have quite a wide scope, and it's growing, to answer your first question.
Yeah. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, last chance for questions, raise your hand on the chat. Otherwise, I'd like to say on behalf of Swesif, thank you very much to Rachel Crossley and also to Helena Björk for very interesting presentations today. And that is reiterated by somebody joining through the chat as well. Welcome. We'll make an edited version of the slides available to Swesif members, and potentially also the recording. We will confirm that later. Thank you very much, and of course we'll very happy to facilitate making sure that any participants get in touch with the speakers directly if that is relevant. So thank you very much for today, and have a fantastic rest of the day, everybody. And I very much appreciate having had the chance to learn a bit more about these important topics.
Thank you very much indeed, Swesif, as well. Thanks to everybody who joined.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.